Read the prompt and the articles to you. If this helps you, please read along with me. Your job will be to pause me as I'm reading so that you can highlight or underline the important evidence that you could use. And since this is argumentative, you're going to need to pick two colors and do everything for the topic in one color, everything that could be evidence against in another color, so that way you can see which one has the most evidence when you're choosing your side. Your school district is debating on whether to abolish their school uniform policy, in which, as of now, all students must wear a uniform to school each day. They claim that students should not be required to wear uniforms because they do little to improve school climate. Consider both the advantages and disadvantages of the school district eliminating the uniform policy. Write an essay stating your position on the issue of your school district and if they should abolish the uniform policy. Where is my prompt sentence? Just to remind you, the prompt sentence is always write an essay, and it's always at the very end of a prompt. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to underline this sentence because this is my prompt sentence. And so the whole focus is on stating my position, which means it's argumentative, on whether or not they should abolish the uniform policy, meaning to get rid or do away with it. All right, so let's read the articles. Should students have to wear school uniforms by News ELA? Although only private school students used to wear uniforms, now 1 in 5 U.S. public schools require students to wear uniforms during the 2013-14 school year, up from 1 in 8 since 03 to 04. Proponents say that school uniforms make schools safer for students. So as an example to show you, so uniforms make schools safer for students, that would be evidence for, and I'm going to turn all my evidence for yellow, and maybe all my against evidence will be pink. They say uniforms create a level playing field. There's another piece that reduces the influence a family's economic background has on a student's education. Uniforms also encourage children to focus on their students rather than their clothes. All good points. After this, just to show you, I'm not going to keep doing that. I'm going to let you figure them out from yourselves, but those are some different points that you could highlight for uniforms in that paragraph. Opponents say, so this would be against, that school uniforms violate students' right to express themselves. So I'm going to highlight that sentence, and I'm going to turn it pink because I'm showing, or red, whatever color you want to call that, because I'm showing that that is my against uniforms. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to alternate between the two colors. They also say that students who wear uniforms don't behave better or do better in school. They argue that uniforms actually emphasize rather than hide the differences between wealthy and poor students. So all good points that you could highlight whatever you want from there against uniforms. All right, from here on out, I'm just going to read. Pause me as you need to so that you can highlight or underline as you see fit. U.S. school uniform movement begins. The first U.S. public schools known to require students to wear uniforms were in Maryland and Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1987. School officials said that the students' frame of mind had improved and that discipline problems were down. They also reported that students were not as interested in wearing expensive designer clothing at school. The uniforms also saved the students' families money. Soon the movement spread to other states. Ed Koh, then mayor of New York City, said that uniforms encourage common respect and improve the learning environment. In 1969, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that schools could not restrict students' freedom of expression as long as the students' choices were not disruptive and did not affect the rights of others. In 2000, a 9-year-old student was suspended twice for refusing to wear a school uniform because it went against his family's religious beliefs. Students were then allowed to opt out for religious reasons. No state law requires school uniforms, and no state law bans uniforms. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, the number of public schools requiring uniforms has increased. A higher proportion of schools located in cities had required uniforms than schools in suburban and rural areas. Uniforms were far more common in high poverty schools than in low poverty schools. Should schools make it mandatory that students wear school uniforms? By Marie Anderson. Uniforms may improve school climates, but they are not a quick fix for the complex problems that schools face. When the Washoe County School District in Nevada switched to mandatory uniforms, they found that it improved their campuses. During the first year of uniforms, discipline referrals dropped by 10%, and police report data showed a 63% decrease in incidents. 41% of the students said that they felt there was less gang activity on campus since the uniform requirement had been implemented. California reported 50% fewer school fights and muggings and 74% decline in sexual offenses just 1 year after implementing a uniform policy. Some opponents to uniforms say that it's unfair to require this additional expense for a public school, and a uniform policy might create a financial burden to some families. According to school uniform retailer JCPenney, parents could potentially purchase a week's worth of uniforms for between $110 and $175. These costs are comparable to back-to-school shopping costs for regular clothes, where families spend an average of $131 per child. Proponents of school uniforms often cite increased academic achievement as a reason for schools to use such a policy. A study by Ryan Young in 2009 found that uniforms have little to no effect on boosting achievement levels. Uniforms alone, he found, were not the cause of higher academic achievement, and there was little evidence to support the claim that schools who adopt a uniform policy will experience higher test scores. Are you for or against school uniforms? From the Huffington Post. 2 fashion editors sound off on uniform debate. Wearing a uniform to school is why I have a good relationship with my mother. Okay, that might not be the only reason, but it certainly makes the top 10. When I was 14 and insufferable, my mom and I fought about a lot of things. Whether or not Michael Bublé constituted good road trip music, why it wasn't okay for her to say funky, but no, not once did we ever argue about clothing. And thank God for that, because I know there would have been battles. From the ages of 9 to 17, I wore a tie, kilt, and blouse to school every single day, and it was bloody fantastic. If I could get away with wearing the same thing to the office all week and not be judged, I would. Even though I work in fashion, having my outfit predetermined would free up my brain to focus on more important tasks like taking BuzzFeed quizzes entitled, "Which original Beanie Baby speaks directly to your soul?" There are tons of arguments against uniforms, like they limit self-expression, yada, yada, yada. But you know what I was forced to do in high school? Express myself using words. Something I found somewhat helpful in my career as a writer. And if you're still not buying into the whole knee socks and blazer thing, let me appeal to your sense of reason. It's a huge time saver. To illustrate my point, I have compared my morning routine in high school with uniform to my routine now without uniform. High school. Hit the snooze button. Hit the snooze button again. Hit the snooze button a third time. Eventually get up because my parents were screaming at me. With half-shut eyes, find my kilt on the floor, a clean blouse, and hopefully my tie. Though I always lost my tie. Brush my teeth, grab a banana, endure a sarcastic comment from my dad because I didn't brush my hair, get in the car. Now, hit the snooze button again, hit the snooze button a third time. Eventually get out of bed for fear of being fired from work. With half-shut eyes, try and figure out what to wear. Give up and instead go brush my teeth. Go back to my closet. Give up again. Grab a banana. Start stressing because I have no clothes. Consider the weather. Try on an outfit. Laugh that I even considered wearing skinny jeans and move on to something with an elastic waist. Eventually, just put on what I was wearing yesterday because, let's be honest, who's going to notice? Freak out because now I'm actually really late. Still don't brush my hair. Walk to work. In summary, having a uniform not only caused me way less stress in the morning, but it also ensured that I was always on time. And hey, I can look back at school photos and not cringe at what I was wearing. All right, against. Like so many others, the time right before high school was a pretty interesting time for me. I went on a no shower kick and swore by socks and sandals. My new attitude towards style was largely a result of the fact that I had been accepted into performing arts school, a lifelong dream come true. When I walked through the doors on that very first day, freshman year, one thing struck me immediately: the unique way everyone expressed themselves for their own personal style. Whether it was green hair, huge flat platforms, or in my case, no one gave anyone else a second glance over what they were wearing. I felt instantly at home. It seemed for the first time I was in a place where I could truly express myself. Of course, coming into my own personal style took some trial and error. There was a period of time where I would match my t-shirts to my stockings, and even though I consider those times to be pretty dark fashion-wise, they still played a part in the evolution of my style. My formative years would have been totally different had I not been given the chance to evolve through my attire each day. Let's also not forget what teenagers are like, specifically teenagers who are also artists and were raised in New York City. Uniforms would have not only never worked in my school, I'm going to go ahead and guess that they would have created more problems than solutions. Clothing allowed us to be inspired by one another and to understand and even admire each other. I understand the benefits of uniforms in schools, but teenagers are angsty enough without having to also be restricted in their clothing choices. And I will be forever grateful that I got to make so many sartorial mistakes throughout those years. Dress for Success public uniforms. From tiny southern towns to the nation's largest cities, public school uniforms have become so common this year that in many areas they are no longer the exception, but the rule. In Miami, 196 out of 328 public schools require uniforms this year, more than twice as many as last. In Cleveland, 2/3 of public schools have adopted uniforms. In Chicago, 4 out of 5 schools have uniforms, as do more than half the schools in Boston. And in New York, where only 10% of the schools had uniforms last year, Philip Russo, a spokesman for the Board of Education, said he expected conservatively that 25% would have uniforms by the end of the year. I don't know exact numbers, but more than half the urban school districts in the country have some uniform policy. It's increased this year, and I suspect it will continue to increase, since there seem to be more benefits and no serious drawbacks, said Mike Casserly, executive director of the Council of the Great City Schools, a Washington group that represents the nation's largest urban school districts. While the whole concept of public school uniforms would probably have aroused strong opposition 10 or 20 years ago from those seeing it as a stifling of student self-expression, an attempt to infringe on individuality, some see it as a sign of the times that few such complaints are being heard. Throughout society, there is a popular support for any measure that sounds like it supports greater law and order, even if there's no evidence that it actually has any effect, said Nadine Strawson, president of the American Civil Liberties Union. I don't think politicians really believe in school uniforms, but they do it to get kudos to be seen as taking action without costing taxpayers money. And while we do get some complaints, lots of people shrug their shoulders thinking it may not do any good, but it won't do much harm either. In Zion, 50 miles north of Chicago, Jerry Lynn Williams, the principal of Shiloh Park Elementary School, says she loves driving in each morning and seeing the children gathering, more of them each week, in the red, white, and blue uniforms she introduced this school year. They look so nice and neat and crisp, Ms. Williams said. It's probably only about 40% of them wearing the uniform so far, but it's growing. We are going to do a tally soon, and if there's the parent support I think there is, I'd love to make it mandatory next year. These days, uniforms are less likely to be a matter of plaid pleats and white dress shirts than at the Shiloh Park, persuading students to wear navy pants or skirts and red, white, or blue tops. At most schools, uniforms are voluntary. In Boston, for example, of 125 schools, 58 have voluntary uniforms and 18 have mandatory uniform policies. While a smattering of public schools had uniforms starting in the 1980s, the practice did not become widespread until 1994, when Long Beach, California adopted a district-wide mandatory rule on uniforms for all elementary and middle school students. Its much publicized report the following year said school crime had decreased 36%. Last year, after President Clinton's State of the Union address included a pitch for school uniforms, the United States Department of Education sent every district in the nation a pamphlet on the subject, beginning with a section titled School Uniforms, Where They Are and Why They Work. School administrators in many cities say that parents, teachers, and students alike are surprisingly enthusiastic about uniforms. Everywhere I've gone, it's been received with great excitement, said Mr. Russo in New York. Even kids who initially don't like the idea say they feel they're being treated with more respect. It really breeds a lot of unity and self-esteem, and it makes it cheaper for parents to clothe their kids for school. Legally, said Ms. Strawson of the ACLU, school uniform policies have been vulnerable to challenge only when they do not make provision for free uniforms for those who cannot afford them, or when they fail to include a provision allowing parents to opt their children out. We've won some of these cases quite recently in California and Florida, she said, but once you have an opt-out provision and it's enforced, it takes away the coercion and there's not much of a legal leg to stand on. As a practical matter, many parents favor school uniforms, finding they make it both easier and cheaper to outfit their children each day. In their effort to eliminate fashion competition, some districts not only dictate colors, but forbid clothing with visible labels or logos. The whole point is to have the children to be equal, not to divide the haves and have-nots, said Dr. Joe Haynes, the superintendent of schools in Greenville, Mississippi, who this year expanded his district's policy to cover all students and ban all labels. Some principals said labels might signify things, and we wanted to avoid any possibility of gang problems of some group of kids deciding to buy the same brand and thinking the little thing on their shirt represents something. Responding to the no-label pressure and to students' strong attachment to brand names, a Georgia apparel company, Duckhead, created a line of school clothes with discrete logos on flaps that can be tucked away in a pocket during class. At Shiloh Park, as at many other schools, students get a day off from uniforms every Friday. And like students elsewhere, Ms. Williams' younger students have taken to the uniforms more happily than the older ones. In some classrooms, teachers, too, are wearing the uniforms. We have one class where everybody shows up in uniform, and I think it's because the teacher does, too, and she's someone who has an incredible rapport with parents and kids. While most school systems like New York City allow individual schools to determine their own dress code, a few require uniforms district-wide. But even when the school district has made no move toward uniforms, and where the issue is more one of image than concern about costs, crime, or gang colors, some parents start their own campaign for uniforms. We see a lot of private school students around here, and we like the look, said Vicki Burns, a parent who helped get uniforms this year at Palmer Elementary School outside of Houston. The district hasn't been interested, but we saw the need, and we just decided to go ahead and check into it. The principal at our school had the kids vote on it in their mock election, and they voted it down. But then there was a parent vote, and it got overwhelming support. A parents' committee chose red, white, or blue polo shirts with navy or khaki bottoms with the logo. The uniforms are available either through a local store or a catalog company, Land's End, which started a uniform department in time for this year's school opening. We're getting 40 to 50% of the kids in uniform on a given day, said Ms. Burns, who pays her 10-year-old twins, Martin and Megan, an extra $1 a week in allowance to wear the uniform. I can see it's growing, so it's pretty clearly a success. Megan likes the uniforms, but her brother does not. I think it's easier than deciding what you're going to wear each day, she said, but some of the boys don't like tucking in their shirt.